I'm going to introduce you, should that be required. Rob West is on my left, the director and producer of the film, and Nick Turpin here, who we saw on the film talking about photography. Now we've got about half an hour, and we're going to have time to get any questions you've got. But I'll start the ball rolling. But do stick your hand up if you've got a burning question, as I'm sure you have. We don't see each other in any way like you've shown they used to. 5 million readers is extraordinary, isn't it? There's nothing like it anymore, is there?
No, I don't think there is really. Certainly not in terms of, well, obviously not in terms of printed publications. Yeah, I think it did have an extraordinary reach, not only in the UK, but of course it was distributed all over the place. It distributed in the US, in Ireland. It was sent out to troops overseas in the Middle East and so on. I was speaking to someone the other day who was brought up in Tehran in the early 60s, and he said he used to have copies of Picture Post lying around there. It seemed to get around, you know. So and I guess it was, you know, lying around in pubs and barbershops and so on. So people did see it, were aware of it. It clearly influenced a lot of people's perceptions of what a photography and what it was. My guess is most people were in some way or another aware of Picture Post, even if they didn't actually subscribe to it every week.
Now, the film, I saw The Guardian wrote about it in September. How long has it been out, and where is it? Where have you had it shown?
So yes, it's literally been out since September. It's been in Bristol and Birmingham, and had a week in Bertha Dockhouse in London, and was just last week in the Oxford the Oxford Photography Festival, and went on to get it to a few other photography festivals. We're obviously the life of the independent filmmaker is not always easy, but you just try and get it seen where you can.
And have you paid your bills yet? Did you get a commission? How did all that work?
No, not at all. No, not even started. No.
Good luck. I think we all wish you good luck. I mean, I found that the most extraordinarily uplifting thing to watch, and I really want you to do well out of it. Nick, you started. It's in public, isn't it?
Yes,
I got that right. Which is a collective for street photography.
Yes, a collective of street photographers that I started in January 2000. I started that because I thought I was the only street photographer in London, naively, and I met a couple of others and thought, well, you know, we should show everybody what we're doing. And it's very early days then, 4 years after the internet kind of started, 10 years before Instagram. It was kind of, there wasn't much photography to see online at all at that point.
But we live in an age of social media, and there's nothing like the Picture Post left anymore, and rather like Life in America and all these wonderful, it was really interesting. I hadn't realized that the continent had all these things before us, which is absolutely fascinating. But are we ever going to get anything like this? I mean, if photography's changed, do we even take photographs really like that anymore? We're not seeing them, are we? We're not seeing, as I said, we're not seeing each other in the way that 5 million people did by subscribing to that.
Well, I mean, photography obviously has become, kind of ubiquitous, hasn't it? Everyone's a photographer now. It's certainly changed. Do people go and buy photography anymore like they did to support a magazine like Picture Post? That doesn't seem to happen. I mean, there's been some amazing attempts to reproduce it over the years, and for some reason they've not taken off, and I don't know why that is. Some amazing photography. It's always amazed me that photography is more popular now than it's ever been, and yet probably harder to make a living at than it's ever been. That's always a kind of a strange dilemma.
My photographer friends seem to make more money by teaching other people photography than they actually do by taking photographs themselves. I mean, is that your reality? I mean, your friends and all your colleagues who are street photographers, how are they making a living?
Well, yes, I mean, street photography is probably the least commercial form of photography, so we're really struggling, I suppose. But there's probably 5 or 6 street photographers worldwide who actually get commissioned to shoot street photography commercially.
There were a few more street photographers than 5 or 6, aren't there?
Oh, now there's sort of tens of thousands on Instagram, and I mean, it's a funny situation.
Rob, one question I had was, could you talk a little bit more about this whole Korean War prisoner thing, because the film led me to believe that the lack, the owner's lack of commitment to journalism perhaps was instrumental in the end of it. Is that reasonable? Is that right? Could you speak a bit about that? We have a vested interest as a journalist club, obviously.
Well, it's a strange one. I mean, also Edward Holton was by all accounts a strange guy. He had quite a dominating wife. He had aspirations to become a Conservative MP and so on. I think, as it says in the film, there was always probably a tension between his political philosophy and what in a sense was a driving philosophy of Picture Post, although it wasn't explicitly party political or anything like that. So probably there was all that was tension, and I suppose that tension came to a head as the 50s went on, and Picture Post lost circulation, it lost advertising, there was a competition of television, all kinds of other things were happening. Obviously, other magazines were coming on and doing some of the same things. So it may be that there came to a certain point where he just thought this isn't going to be a commercial proposition. It may be that he had other political reasons why he was actually quite happy to kill Picture Post, and undoubtedly it had lost its way for one reason or another. It lost its way. It had no longer had that driving sense of purpose that it had during the, if you like, the glory days from the sort of late 30s into the late 40s. And I suppose you could also say that some of the things that it really campaigned for had come to be, and so there was no longer perhaps that.
Like what? What do you mean?
Well, the National Health Service would be an example. A expanded welfare state, all these kind of things which it had campaigned for during the Second World War came to be, and therefore there was no longer quite that sense of driving social purpose behind a lot of what it was doing. And I think the social context from the late 30s, where you had this deep poverty and huge social division, that had somehow become blurred with the expansion of the welfare state and some of the things that came with it, social housing, obviously the NHS and so on.
Well, I'm going to open up to the audience because I would love to talk about this for hours, but I want to give other people a chance to ask questions. Has anybody got any further questions?
I was struck by, in a sense, the irony that you were using a moving picture in order to tell the story of a still picture's development. Did you sometimes wonder about that? And if I could ask a second question, Stefan Laurent, how come, given his relationship with Churchill, that he got swallowed up in Churchill's collar the lot when everybody was swept off into internment camps and all the rest of it, if they were of the wrong origin?
I'll try and answer the second question. I mean, the second question is a very complicated one, and people, academics, have argued and continue to argue about exactly what happened. But I think fundamentally, Churchill was not aware. I mean, he was obviously had bigger fish to fry at that moment in time, so he was not aware of what was going on behind the scenes. There was a certain amount of argument and so on as to Stefan Laurent's position and so on. But I think it never got to the point where Churchill became aware, and perhaps if he had been aware, he might have made an exception. Who knows? I don't know. But Michael Berkowitz, who's appears in the film, I believe he's writing a more detailed account of Stefan Laurent's life, which will explore, I think, those kind of issues in more detail. As regards the first issue about making a film about photography, yes, it's a difficult one. And because, of course, we're always conscious that if you're showing a lot of static images, inherently it's not very dramatic, moving, and so on. So from an early point, one of the reasons why we do a little bit of dramatic reconstruction, all that kind of stuff, is to give a little bit of drama to try and bring together that, and also the sense that what we are talking about is not just single images but stories. I mean, encapsulated stories. But of course, it's difficult. I mean, it's not the same thing, obviously, seeing something on the screen than reading it in the printed magazine, and understanding the story in that way. there have been a number of documentaries about photography one way or another. Some seem to work, some don't. I think it's for others to judge. This one.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Two bits. I can shout as loud as anybody wants.
Two things. I think she's a Norwegian girl, the girl in Newcastle. Has she been there for a long time? The Biker Wall thing. I have the book. I thought it was her, and it's Newcastle, by the way. And I forgot my second question. Sorry.
So yeah, she's finished actually, and she's been there 40 years. Yes, yeah, long time. She went to, when she was relatively young, and has been capturing the lives of working class people there for all those years, and created an amazing gallery there, and all sorts of other things. And I think one of the reasons, perhaps to say just more generally, that one of the motivations in this was to try and think about to what extent is there a continuity in all of this, in terms of the premise, I suppose, the hypothesis of this was that the picture post generation of photographers and picture post itself had a major impact on British photography, and particularly what we would now call documentary photography in all its forms, so that we were sort of seeking out leading photographers as a way of trying to think about the continuity of that tradition to some degree. And I think Circa, is I think quite a good exponent of that idea of continuity.
Is the sort of coffee table book the way that somebody can make a living now? Because it's Donovan and people like that onwards have brought books, Snowden, whoever. Can you make your name in a really good book, Nick?
I don't. Well, it depends how you do it. If you self-publish it and it does well, you can make a lot of money, and also a name for yourself. I think my last book sold 9,000 copies and was sold for £16, and now they're £1,500 on eBay and Amazon. I don't make any of that money. That's all the people who supported me at the time it was published. So there is money to be made in publishing and getting your work out there. I think if most of the photographers I know, and certainly myself, we have to combine a lot of things to make a living. So, I work with commissions, produce books. Print sales is quite a big aspect of it. And teaching, of course. So, I do some undergraduate teaching, but also private workshops with people. And I think if you have a name, you can certainly leverage that. And it just pays for your personal work, all the time that you spend on the streets, making pictures for yourself, earning nothing.
Do you still get archive sales? Because I'd heard from some photographer friends that archive sales in photography are dying out, because that was something they used to get a lot of.
I don't have a single picture in a picture library. So I'm the wrong person to ask, but the Night Bus project that I shot made about £40,000 being syndicated around the world in Japan and Southeast Asia and everything. And I think over 3 years I sold about £140,000 of the print. So you can monetize a personal project if it's one that resonates with people.
The other thing I was curious to know is about access. I used to be a video cameraman for a while, and I noticed even in my career that increasingly today you have to get, people say you can't film here, you can't film there. Are you finding that on street photography, that people just say you can't film in my shop, you can't film there or other?
I hear sort of anecdotal evidence that that's the case. It's not something that I've particularly faced myself. I think it depends how good a street photographer you are. So one of the things I teach is sort of how to be invisible on the street, and people don't really see me working, rarely. But I think things are changing. I think the internet, the fact that it's not the photography, it's like where it's going to end up that people are worried about. So, it's being posted on social media and that kind of thing. I think people are a bit concerned. Our biggest problem is the sort of loss of public space, particularly in London. There's like 40 or 50 major areas of the city now which have been sold by councils to developers, and now they are, kind of privately owned. I mean, you know, it's all a bit of a debate.
So you can't photograph on them without their permissions.
Well, this is the argument. I mean, I argue that it's still a public place.
Yeah.
And you know, if you allow the public to come and go use your shops and cafes and restaurants, then, you know, we should be able to take photographs there, and people should be able to cycle through and have a cigarette and busk and protest and all the things you can do in a normal public place. But it's very interesting. You know, if you go to some of these places like, you know, Broadgate or somewhere like that, or even places like the Olympic Park, which is supposed to be a legacy for the city, you know, it's all kind of, you know, photography is controlled there and everything. So, you know, I think it's a public place, and I would argue that I can take pictures there, and in a democracy, that's how it should be. Everything that happens in a public place should be a matter of public record, you know.
I would agree with you.
You try explaining that to a security guard.
Well, I know.
Have you ever, you know, got in trouble with your pictures that you've published in books where people that didn't give consent have been used in the book? And
I haven't really, no. And I think probably because my work is not really critical. I don't think a lot of my work is quite amusing or kind of beautiful in a way. You know, I don't make people look bad. I've only ever had people get in touch and want prints, you know, and say, you know, that's my uncle or whatever. I've had that. I did a talk once where a little guy in the picture with the big beard, you know, his cousin was sitting in the front row, and there's a slight gasp when that picture came up. But no, it's always been nice, to be honest with you. I've been very lucky with that.
You never attempt to get consent from the sign?
No, I just couldn't work like that. You know, I'm a complete observer. I'm invisible when I work, really. You know, like a ghost kind of walking along the street, picking off moments, and I don't really, you know, get into conversation with people at all.
Did the GDPR change that for you at all?
There was a lot of debate when that legislation first kind of was tabled and came out. I mean, I don't think GDPR was ever really aimed at photography. I think it's when you know, you associate some characteristics or information with a named person, rather than, you know, people in the street who may or may not be somebody you know or can recognize. Or I personally don't think it was ever intended to be applied to street photography, but maybe that's because I don't want it to be. I mean, I don't think we do any harm. That's the thing. You know, I actually think.
What's invasion of privacy, though, is that you might be photographing someone who's having an affair or doing something they shouldn't be doing.
Well, that, you know, someone's having an affair, that's up to them. If they do it in a public place and kiss somebody else's wife, and I take a picture of it, that's up to them, not me. That's their decision. I mean, I only photograph things that any of us could see with our eyes.
But it goes all over the internet, so it's a bit sort of public, really, isn't it? Yeah.
I don't think that actually changes it myself. I mean, I think it'd be an extremely sad day when we can't take a photograph in a public place, you know, without permission.
Children the way that you live in the picture place there.
Well, you could legally, you can still do it. It's just morally and ethically, is it right to photograph minors? And you know, I mean, you know, if you go down that route, there's this kind of assumption that street photographers are paedophiles, and I reject that altogether. You know, we're not. We're just people who are documenting modern life. You know, I have my pictures in the Museum of London because I capture the City of London at a certain period in history. That's what I'm out there doing. You know, we're in danger of creating a record of modern life that has no children in it, which I think is
so you
a shame.
Carry on photograph children, you don't worry about that.
I photograph children if they are part of a bigger scene. I don't focus in on children. I mean, I think every photographer has to make their own decision about that. But you know, if they're in a general view and they appear with parents or something, and there's 10 other people in the picture, I don't worry too much there. But I tend not to photograph, you know, to make a picture with two people who are both children.
Yeah.
Or whatever. You
So
know,
you're missing out on some of the picture posts.
probably, yeah. I mean,
pictures, yeah.
oh, definitely. And people like Helen Levitt, you know, take her pictures on the streets of New York, lots of children playing, all that kind of thing. We're not. It's what Peter Dench said in the film. You know, we're not making that record anymore. I mean, you know, lots of young parents can't actually take pictures of their children at their own sports day because it's not allowed anymore. And I worry about how far we go down that route. I mean, obviously there are protection issues. I understand that, but you know, equally, I think it's important that you know, we can in democracy we can still photograph what happens in a public place.
We've got a question there, and then another one straight after in the back.
Thanks very much. I'm no photographer. I don't know much about it, but it strikes me that with picture posts, there were two things that were quite different. One was the black and white photography, which was so dominant. and the fact that you processed pictures yourself. You had your own darkroom and you could actually adjust the picture. Do you think that was why it was such a successful era and perhaps has faded out in the modern way of doing color photography, instant stuff that you process on the machine?
Who wants to answer that one?
I go roundabout sort of way to answer that. I joined the independent newspaper in 1990 and worked there on the staff for 8 or 9 years. And during my time there, color came in. We were able to reproduce color in the newspaper. We were able to shoot color negative film, and we got color darkroom. Up until that point, it had always been black and white. And I think probably picture post was black and white just because of the technology that was available at the time. Just, you know, it was, I mean, they had a red masthead, didn't they? But I think color reproduction of images just wasn't, you know, like, I think just financially viable at the time. And it came in very slowly. I think even like early 90s in the independent, 93, 94 or something, we started having color photographs. It's comparatively recent. So I think probably it was more for that reason than an artistic decision. And I think probably the reason that it, you know, eventually failed was probably economic situation as well. I think the competition of TV, you know, made picture post unviable in the same way that, you know, the independent newspaper had this incredible heyday and was like the benchmark for newspaper photography. But, you know, it wasn't TV that hit the independent. It was things like the internet and all the advertising revenue leaving print and poster advertising and going more into, you know, online and influencers and that whole world. So I think there's a lot of economics behind it.
I mean, you know, obviously there's danger of kind of putting picture post photography on a pedestal. I mean, a lot of it was obviously done to a commission. It was a, you know, a working magazine. It was producing thousands of stories, many of which never got seen or got killed, and many, you know, only a small percentage of photographs that got taken were printed and so on. And I think a lot of the photographers, I mean, it varied clearly between the personality of the photographers, but some of them just saw themselves as kind of working photographers there to fulfill a brief. Having said that, some of them clearly did see themselves, I mean, Bill Brandt, obviously, an example, saw themselves in a slightly different light. And there's no doubt at all that Stefan Laurent, part of his purpose was to bring the best of the world's photography to the attention of the mass public. So there was, I think, the balance between, you know, what you might call working photography, which was not, you know, giving too much, as Grace Robertson said, the conditions were not ideal for the reproduction of photography, with some more conscious attempt to show the best of photography and the best light to the broad public.
Gentleman at the back.
Thank you. We saw in the film some photos of Churchill at home, I think doing some home DIY. I just wondered, perhaps in more recent times, if you've taken pictures of perhaps well-known people and sort of gained an insight that perhaps the rest of us wouldn't see, either through their body language or how they interact with other people. For example, that might be different to the image that they project, but because of your sort of skilled experience, you can see that closely. I just wondered if you had any stories like that.
You mean me personally photographing celebrities and people like that? Yeah. I mean, I think every portrait you do, you see a non-public side of the person that you go and photograph. I mean, I remember photographing Mandela when he was first released, and he was just a very old man with an aching back when I met him, not the legend that we all kind of campaigned for when I was a schoolboy. So I think when you do meet people face to face like that, then you know you inevitably get a sense of that. Just spending time with them, they're not what you expect very often. I don't know, politicians. I mean, you know, you see some things behind the scenes at Conservative Party conferences and that sort of thing, you know. I'm just trying to think of a really good example.
I mean, I think in fairness, those pictures of Churchill, although they appear kind of to have an intimacy that you would expect, they were in the context that he was at that point in the wilderness, and he was just trying to, if you like, reestablish himself as a politician and get that platform back. So I don't think, in a way, those photos are so far removed from some of the types of PR type activities that the politicians do these days to try and, you know, you might imagine, you know, someone like Matt Hancock trying to re-establish himself on the public platform, trying to arrange for photographers to show him at home being nice to his wife or something, you know. So, you know, Churchill at home working on the roof, I think there was a degree of knowingness to what he was doing there, and obviously it worked.
Collaboration going on.
Yeah.
Another question?
To make a living, have you got DVDs available in the foyer, Ross? Or are you trying to?
I'm not in the foyer, but everything is available online from the website, picturestoriesfilm.com. So you can get the DVD, you can download it, and so on. And indeed, you know, very open to any suggestions as to how else we might bring this to a wider audience. I think just one thing I would say is that what we're particularly keen is to try and get this to younger audiences. We're very well aware that most young people have not heard of Picture Post, probably think it's entirely irrelevant to what they're about. But we do think that, you know, younger people who have an interest in photography, or maybe studying photography and so on, potentially do have something to connect with in all of this, and certainly be interested to what extent younger people see a connection. So we are keen to get this out to kind of photography schools, colleges, and so on in whatever way we can. So any ideas around that, I'm very open and interested to hear.
It's kind of an obvious question, but what sparked your interest? What sparked your interest in telling the story of Picture Post?
I suppose a lot of these things have a slightly odd evolution. I've been aware of Picture Post for a long time. And I just sort of, in researching something else, I came across an article lamenting the fact that this whole generation of Picture Post photographers had been somewhat neglected and missed of time. And just sort of slightly on haphazardly, I sort of wrote to Getty, who own much of the Picture Post archive, and so on, just with the idea, would it be interesting to look at Picture Post through modern day eyes, the eyes of modern day photographers? Probably expecting them to tell me to go away and think of something else. And to my surprise, they were actually very, very enthusiastic and said, we've been trying to get a film about Picture Post made for the last 25 years, and for one reason or another, it's never happened. So they to my surprise, were quite supportive, and that set the ball rolling. But I never, you know, I didn't prior to that expect anything to come out of it.
We've got time for a final question. But there are none.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Did it take to make?
Not full time, but from start to finish, about 3 years. Too long.
Well, oh yes, final question then.
Would anybody else like a night out with Grace Robinson if she's still about? Like a girl.
Yeah, sadly, she died earlier this year. So that was her last interview. But she was at that point about 89, and very sprightly 89. And so, as far as I know, there's now only 2 living Picture Post photographers, John Chillingworth and I think Trevor Philpott, and they're both getting on a bit.
Well, I have to wrap up. Well, I think on behalf of all of us, I really hope you not only pay your costs, but make a bit of money on this. I think I found it personally both uplifting and slightly sad that there isn't a publication reaching 5 million people that tells us about each other in the way that Picture Post did. So thank you both of you. Thank you both of you coming and speaking to us.